redemption. So in that particular text, we actually mentioned about Herbert's basic temperament that had been discussed or rather pointed in that particular poem. Regarding a particular kind of a jump, you see, a kind of confusion regarding the essential religiostic beliefs and something. In this particular poem, that is The Collar by George Herbert, the similar kind of orientation has to be taken. This poem was published in the year 1633, probably, as far as I remember. Herbert actually struggles with his religious beliefs again, and significantly, you will find that this poem also focuses on that particular crisis that he was feeling, and at the same time, it focuses or it says us or tells us something about the fundamental basics of, you know, which particular sect should I follow and which should I not. Generally, if you think about the term the collar, okay, that is the title of this particular poem. Essentially, you will find that collar, this very term is related with the you know, it's a kind of a part of the government. Generally, আমরা collar বলতে কি বুঝি, জামার collar বা এই ধরনের কোনো collar. কিন্তু মানে আমি বলতে চাইছি যে এই টার্মটার ডাবল ওরিয়েন্টেশন আছে। যেমন ধরো লিটারালি, if we think about the term collar, then you will find that certainly it is focusing on a pattern of submission, a pattern of control. Why? Because collar আরো কিন্তু মানে ওরিয়েন্টেশন আছে। তুমি দেখবে যে কলার পরানো হয় কোনো একটা প্রাণীকে হয়তো, হ্যাঁ। এবার এই যে কলারটা, এটা কিন্তু কন্ট্রোলিং একটা ওরিয়েন্টেশন কাজ করে, মানে শুধুমাত্র এটা গভর্নমেন্টের পার্সপেক্টিভ থেকে নয়। Literally, we find that the collar can also be associated with the symbolic interpretation or symbolic orientation of control and submission. At another point, when you will find that the collar is to some extent it is associated with the clothing part, and it is not to be associated with the clothing of the ordinary human being in general. Rather, you will find it is the clothing of a clergyman. Okay. As I have mentioned that both the poems that are in your syllabus, whether it is Redemption or The Collar, these are generally being considered to be the poems that deal with a kind of religiostic orientation or religiostic interpretation. So from that very angle, from that very perspective, we can say that the collar that can be related with the clothing of a clergy, it can also signify that it is referring to the restraint for the priests. Okay, মানে একদিকে আমি বললাম যে কলারটা সাবমিশন, কন্ট্রোল বা রেস্ট্রেন্টকে সিগনিফাই করছে, অন্যদিকে আমি তোমাদেরকে বললাম যে কলার টার্মটা এখানে ক্লার্জিম্যান যারা রয়েছে তাদের ক্লোদিং এর পার্টটাকে সিগনিফাই করছে। যদি দুটোকে আমি এক জায়গায় অ্যাসোসিয়েট করতে চাই, তাহলে আমি সেখানে বলতে পারি যে from that particular angle, from that very angle, it can also be said that it is actually referring to the restraint for priests. দুটোকে যদি আমি লিঙ্ক আপ করি fundamentally. At another point, I must say that as I've mentioned, that one of the chief ingredients or one of the chief features or maybe the theme or content of Herbert's poems, what actually deals with some religiostic interpretation, it actually deals with, you know, something related to the change or shift in the form of religiostic sect divisions or maybe religiostic beliefs or something like that. So somehow that particular term also be, or that particular feature can, or maybe the content can also be related with this particular poem, and with the help of the color, that means changing color, for example, from one particular sect to another, it can also be related with this particular form. Now, what happens, as it is the color, and as I've mentioned that in my previous lecture or previous discussion, that there was a particular metaphor. Okay, as I mentioned previously, the metaphor of it's a land and property. Here also you will find that a metaphor of it's a journey. You see, I struck the board. It begins in this particular fashion. So such a kind of, this board is literally aboard, as you know. এটা বলতে কি বোঝায় যে সমুদ্র যাত্রা, কোনো শিপ আর কি, হ্যাঁ, এবং তার বোর্ড যেটা মানে ডক বলে, মানে তোমার ওই ডেক যেটাকে বলে আর কি ওপরটাতে। তো সেই I struck the board and cried, no more I will abroad, মানে আমি আর যাব না। মানে প্রথমেই দেখো the poem actually begins with a strong negative. ওকে, মানে আমি যে প্যাটার্নটাতে চিন্তা ভাবনা করে অভ্যস্ত, আমি যে সেক্টটাতে, রিলিজিয়াস সেক্টটাতে আমি ফলো করে অভ্যস্ত, the question certainly arises. You see that here there are ample references, a number of references of some interrogatives. Okay, so why such a kind of interrogative? You will find certainly that it's a kind of an interrogation that can be located in terms of the self-interrogation altogether. So at the very beginning you will find the interrogations have been taken place, then you will find some answer is mentally supplied to that, and at the end you will find, just like the previous poem, there is a kind of a reply to it. That means it's a kind of a resolution. So ultimately in each of these two poems, where it is the last one, that is the redemption, and this one, that is the color, you will find that it's a kind of an elongated argument. Okay, that is an elongated argumentative discourse have been made with the help of this particular poem. And you know that whenever we think in terms of an argumentative discourse, it actually deals with some suppositions. Okay, here you will find it is formed in the term in the reference of the questions. Then you will find a kind of an answer is supplied to that, and ultimately from thesis and antithesis there the synthesis comes, that is the resolution, that is the byproduct of this particular poem also. So when you find that the speaker says, what shall I ever sigh and pine? So these are the two words that you can find here. The first one is sigh, the second one is pine. Okay, now when you think about the term like sigh, dirgho nishwash phela, you cannot say that that particular action is related or directly related with any joyous mood. Rather you will find that the sigh, this very term, can be related with a note of despair. The term sigh can also be related with the typical sad and somber situations. And if you think about the second term, that is pine, generally pining in thought, it means it's a deep thought that to be considered. So whenever you are পর্যালোচনা করা, বাংলায় আমরা যেটাকে বলি, মানে you are thinking deeply, okay, and ultimately you are to some extent in the form of retrospection, you are actually to some extent evaluating, judging, or maybe examining your activities, your works, your thought process, and something like that. So what we generally do, some of us actually do this regularly, that we try to evaluate our works, we try to evaluate our actions, whether what I have done is good or not, what I have done is proper or not. And then the question certainly arises, what shall I ever sigh and pine? So a procedure ki ami thakbo. And then to some extent he says, my lines and life are free, free as the road, loose as the wind, as large as store. Shall I be seen in suit? আমি লাস্ট দিন তোমাদের বলেছি যে ওই সুট বলতে এটা কিন্তু কোথাও যেন একটা প্লিডিং কে রেফার করে, এবং কোনো একটা particular angle থেকে this particular term suit can be related with the pattern of life leading of a clergyman. Because in my previous poem, or in my previous lecture, I was discussing on the term suit. Okay, it's a kind of a prayer, kind of a pleading. Okay, so that's why he says, so you see this, it's a kind of an argument has been created, self-argument, self-discourse that have been created, self-interrogation, the questioning, as if one particular self is questioning the other. It says that, shall I ever sigh and pine? My lines and life are free. Okay, there is no problem in it. My life is free, and free as a road, that means it is never ending, and it is loose as wind and as large as a store. So there are ample references of possibilities. It has its own width, it has its own length, it has its own provisions. Ample provisions are there, ample prospects are there. So ultimately, shall I be still in suit? That means still in prayer, and still am praying for something, what kind of prayer it is. Is it referring to the typical Christian prayer that, oh God, please cleanse my soul and give me the opportunity to come to your kingdom. I want to be in close proximity with you. And certainly, in the form of salvation, I can get you. I can get, to some extent, the affection, okay, or maybe the blessings from you for everlasting time. So that's why it says that, okay, there are ample references, ample provisions, and ample opportunities present in this particular life. So shall I continue the life of pain and repentance at this moment and think about the life hereafter? Okay, have I no harvest? So what I have got? Now the question comes here. He says, have I no harvest but thorn? So what I have found? Is there anything positive that I have earned in this life? In the life of penance, in the life of suffering, in the life of, repentance, hard life, full of prayer, full of suffering, full of penance, what I have got? Is there any other harvest except thorns? So it is actually referring to the fruitlessness. The life of a clergyman is so hard. The life of a person who is too much religious, you will find that it is actually based on the matter of penitence. It is actually dealt with different kinds of, sacrifices, negation of your demands. And here he says that what I have got? What? Have I no harvest but a thorn? To let me blood and not restore what I have lost with cordial fruit. So there is nothing else, there is nothing left actually. Only I have thorn to prick me. There is nothing fruitful here. The thorns are letting my blood away. It doesn't restore anything that I have lost with cordial fruit. Nothing. No particular form of fruit is there. No particular result is there. Sure, there was wine. True, there was the possibility. Sure, there was wine. Before my sighs did dry, so there was possibility. But when I begin to sigh, when I chose my life of penitence, when I chose my life of, repentance and prayer, that means the life of the clergy, with my every sigh, all these wine have vanished. Everything have vanished, or everything has gone. So here it says that sure, there was wine before my sighs did dry it. So the wine has been made dry. The essences have been sucked up to some extent. There was corn, the possibility of harvesting, before my tears did drown it. So again, the possibility has been negated. Now, if you think about the terms like wine and corn or everything, these are some possibilities that can be related with your life, that can be related with your material, earthly enterprises, prosperity to be specific, the results to be specific, the fruitfulness to be specific. And where you find it is the matter with sigh and tears, and everywhere you will find that whether it is the matter with wine or corn, the possibilities have been completely being negated with the sighs and with the tears. Now, sighs and tears are related with the pattern of life that he is leading. And with that particular pattern of life that he is leading at this moment, the possibility of your earthly enterprises have completely been negated. The results have been completely being washed up. So therefore he says, sure there was wine, there was the possibility before my sighs did dry it. So it has made dry. There was corn before my tears did drown it. Is the year only lost to me? Have I no bays to crown it? No flowers, no garlands gay, all blasted, all wasted. So up to this, so these are the questions you see. As I mentioned, these are nothing but a kind of introspection. When you are actually judging your actions. So that's what it says, is the year only lost to me? Or it is lost to the others? Am I the only person who is thinking in this way? Who is evaluating and considering that everything has been lost? Or have I no base to crown it? There is nothing, you know. The bays are actually referring to, as you can find the bays, literally, that can be related with some possibilities, some crowns that have been made out of that. So is the year only lost to me? Have I no base to crown it, with the help of which you can be made, the laurel crowns and something like that. There is no garland, there is no flower which can be related with something joyous, something gay. Everything is blasted, all wasted. So up to this, the questions are there. As I mentioned, that these are matters of introspection. It's a matter of self-interrogation, almost like that. And then the answer is mentally supplied from the next line. What it says, not so, my heart. So ultimately, you can find that it is not simply the question for George Herbert alone. Each and every kind of clergyman, you see, who are actually choosing the path of penance and repentance and suffering, they are always with the particular consideration. They are with the temptations are there. That's why are you choosing the path of, say, despair? Why are you choosing the path of suffering? Because there is, or maybe there are, ample provisions for your sensual gratifications. What the human body actually needs, what the human body actually enjoys, each and every patterns of enjoyment is present. So why you are abjuring that particular form? Why you're abjuring your senses? So that is the fundamental question probably each and every clergyman who actually devoted their lives for the sake of religion, who have devoted their lives to satisfy the spiritual needs only, they are facing. And then you will find from the next line, the very next line, to some extent the answers have been supplied to it. What it says, not so, my heart, but there is fruit, and thou hast hands. So the fruits are there, the results are there, but you have to work out. If you do not do your work, then how can the result be achieved? If you do not do your work, how can you get the result? So your hands are actually being focused, or the hands are actually referring to the work. That means only idle thinking, only the matter of retrospection and retrospecting without any action, these will not do. So therefore it says, not so my heart, but there is fruit. And thou hast hands. Recover all thy sigh-blown age on double pleasures. You have the possibility. You can recover your sigh-blown age. That means the age, you are the aged persons and you have lost your age, the sigh-blown age, as you can see, the years. You can think about the double pleasures. Leave thy cold dispute of what is fit and not. Don't think about the fit and misfit and something like that. The cold dispute, don't think about that. Don't consider the things which are not important to someone's spiritual need. Leave thy cold dispute of what is fit and not. Forsake thy cage, thy rope of sands which petty thoughts have made and made to thee good cable. These are the petty things. As we are reading a spiritual poem, as you can see, a poem that actually celebrates spiritualism, a poem that actually brings some Christian connotations within, a poem that actually teaches religion to us in the form of literature. So fundamentally, you will find some different ways of instructions are always given through these lines. Therefore, it says, forsake thy cage. Now, in the literal form, you will find that the cages are referring to the body. Okay? Don't think about the body. Don't think about, as you know, it's a spiritual discourse. An ideology has been incorporated with it. Therefore, it says, forget the body, forsake the cage, forsake the prison house. Don't think about your senses. These are mere rope of sands. When it is a matter of rope of sands, it will vanish in a moment. But if you think about your senses, if you think about the goods and bads, if you think about what is lost and what is not, these petty thoughts actually strengthen the rope of sands, and it actually made a good cable. That will obviously torture you. So if you think about your material life, which are petty things, if you think about the earthly enterprises, which are obviously some petty things anymore, if you think about your bodily pleasures, which are again to be considered as something petty, then the rope of sands, which are trivial and trifling, these will become good cables, powerful cables that will bind you. So it says, therefore, forsake the cage, thy rope of sands, which petty thoughts have made, and made to thee good cable, to enforce and draw, and be thy law, while thou didst wink and wouldst not see. So that's why it says that the rope of sands will certainly have become the good cable, therefore, that can enforce you, that can draw you, and think about your law. Think about your own customs, own law, while thou didst wink and wouldst not see. So ultimately, you will think about these and you will not see the actuality. Away. Take heed. And then the last part actually. So away, take heed. So ultimately think about them. I will abroad. I will go. Call in thy death said there. Tie up thy fears. He that forbears to suit, and serve his need deserves his load. That means the person who actually forbears to suit, here suit against, it has been transferred to fear, or prayer, sorry. So he that forbears to pray and only serve his needs, that is the essential needs and bodily needs, he deserves his load, the pressure that he feels, the pressure that he faces, and something like that. So therefore, it says, he that forbears to suit and serve his need deserves his load. But as I raved and grew more fierce and wild at every word, methought I heard one calling, child. So everywhere, it says therefore. But as I raved and grew more fierce and wild at every word, so each and every word that have been spoken by my conscience, each and every word that have been told to me for the betterment of myself, for the betterment of my spirit, for the betterment of my thinking. Some religious outpourings are there, you see. So each every word I am growing fierce, because it's a kind of a tussle that was going on between my two parts. At that moment, I heard one calling from inside, or maybe a calling from God, who says, child. And I replied, my Lord. So that means at last you'll find that when I replied, my Lord, when I actually answered to the utterance that had been made by God, or maybe my inner conscience, or something like that, this term like my Lord, it is actually indicating to the complete submission. So the particular kind of a tussle, the particular kind of a conflict that was going on between your psyche, or within your psyche, regarding, what to follow and what not to, should I submit myself to God completely, or should I think about something that is actually being associated with the earthly enterprises. Such a kind of tussle, such a kind of conflict that was going on, with the final assertance, with the final utterance of my Lord, it has been completely assured, and it's completely come to any particular resolution that I am submitting myself to that. So with this particular assertion, the poem actually comes to an end. So what you can find in this particular poem, that to some extent in this particular poem, a kind of argumentative discourse has been incorporated. At the very beginning, as I mentioned, that somehow, as this particular poem also, just like the previous one, in this poem you will find it better that Herbert and Herbert's temperament, when in 1633 he was actually thinking about that which particular religious sect I must follow, whether it is related with my old thinking process or thought processes, or should I think about something new, some new orientations have to be followed. So these are considerably being present, or are present in this particular poem. So at the very beginning, as we have found that there is a kind of a interrogative discourse have been incorporated, and then we can find some answers are supplied to it. And at the final part, we find that it is the positive assertion that comes, that I will be a devotee, I will be, or I will remain a true follower of God, okay, or maybe Trinity or something like that. So in that particular way, the poem actually comes to an end.